Hi, this is Jennifer Fink with Building Boys. I am here today with Kelley King. Kelley is the author of Writing the Playbook, a practitioner's guide to creating boy-friendly schools. And Kelley is also a veteran educator, very well informed about boys. Can you just tell us a little bit briefly about how you got so interested in boys and education?
Sure, sure. Well, I've been an educator for about 27 years, so I certainly worked with a lot of boys across a wide age spectrum in my career. And then in 1994, I became the mom of a boy, and that sort of helped it register a little bit more.
It changed everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did. It really changed my perspective, especially as he went into kindergarten and I started trying to help him with homework and
Mm-hmm.
learning. And I just noticed it was just different for him than I expected. And so I started to notice it then and started to make some adjustments in my parenting, especially around trying to keep him motivated around homework and getting that done. And then following, in the subsequent years as I progressed with my career, I became the principal of an elementary school in Boulder Valley and had 250 little boys running around and started to see some really significant gaps in their achievement. And that's where we went about the work of focusing on increasing engagement and achievement for boys, particularly in reading and writing. And that's sort of the genesis of my focus.
And as your experience shows, there's certainly no reason why boys can't do well in school.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We just need to understand their nature a little bit better and to understand how we can meet them where their strengths are um, instead of sort of working against their natural qualities and characteristics that they come into the world with.
So let's talk about this concept of a boy friendly school. What are some characteristics of a boy friendly school versus, say, a school that's less boy friendly?
Well, I think that schools need to sort of rethink some of their more traditional structures. So, for example, classrooms that are more structured around policies and procedures that have kids doing a lot of seat work, a lot of fine motor, um, lacking movement, which would mean like a lot of lecture. So, there's a lot of verbal and auditory, long periods of lecture and note taking. Um, is going to be harder for boys. Boys need to be more actively engaged, more hands-on, a little bit more movement, and they need to understand how what they're studying relates to anything in their life. So relevance is really important for boys. And that's not to say those things aren't important for girls as well. It's just that girls tolerate a traditional classroom setting a little better than boys do. So they also thrive when we change things up, but they can tolerate it better. And then from the school perspective, it's really important just to look at policies such as grading and homework, and do we take recess away from boys who get into have a behavior problem, and they're the ones who need to run it out the most. And some of the things that we do in schools on a school-wide level are really well intended, but they end up having some negative consequences, and educators don't want that. They just haven't necessarily sort of looked at it through that frame before, and it can be really powerful for them once they start to see that boy perspective.
A lot of parents have relatively limited choices for education for their son. There may be, financial constraints. In my school, if excuse me, in my district, if your kid goes to public school, there's one choice for that. So you kind of have the school you have, and it may or may not be particularly boy friendly. What advice do you have for parents for how they can help their sons as much as possible have a positive experience, even if maybe there are some things going on in school that make the environment challenging for your son?
Well, I think within a school there are a lot of different teachers, and so there is some variety there. Not always the ability of a parent to select, of course, that poses challenges. Um, However, I think, well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. Certainly, being really involved with parent conferences and communicating with teachers about what has worked really well for their child in the past, because teachers want it to be a successful experience. I mean, if you can come in and say, boy, it's really worked well for my student, my son, to be able to just stand up while he's writing. If you've got a back counter in the room or something where he can just go or get a clipboard and work on the floor, that you'll just get so much more work out of him. And of course, that's going to appeal to any teacher. It can also be helpful if parents in collaboration with the teacher can ask the teacher about having their son bring something like a squeeze ball or like a hacky sack or something that their son can just be squeezing in their hand while they work, with an understanding that there's parameters, and just say again, this really helps my son be able to focus during writing or during circle time. Or is it okay for my student to be able to stand up during circle time if he's getting fidgety, or to have a clipboard at this time, something in his hands? If you find that my son's getting a little bit antsy, would it be okay for him to run an errand to the office and just so that he gets to walk there and back? And have some of those suggestions that maybe that you can say, I think this will just make your life a lot easier as a teacher, and I know it really helps my son to learn. And come into it with a collaborative sort of approach like that.
Are there other things that parents can be doing at home to be continuing to encourage their son's learning and love of learning, even while working with the school?
Sure. One of the things that we want kids to do is, we don't want to kill their joy of learning and in homework, and we don't want parents to ruin their relationship and have a lot of stress in their home over homework. And I know everyone's probably going, okay, you just described my life.
Right, everybody wants these answers.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a principal, I sat with a school psychologist at a staffing, and she said very emphatically to a couple there, at our meeting, said, don't let homework ruin your relationship with your child. And doesn't that make so much sense when we really boil it down to what's important? So although we also want our child to keep up with homework. So one thing that can be really helpful is to make it playful, make it a game, especially at the younger levels, if it's an elementary child. Play some physical games. I did all kinds of those with my son, even where I sat on him and tickled him, if he didn't get it right. Or he'd try to do these chin-ups while doing his spelling words, and he'd try to hold himself up there, and it became this physical challenge. Or we shoot hoops, or even, if you just go for a walk with flashcards and study while you're walking. It just makes it, the boys are moving around, their brains are more activated, there's more blood flow to their brain when they're studying and walking. And those activities can actually become more of a bonding activity than a stressful activity where you might be saying, no, sit down, we're going to get this done, don't move, get your pencil, we're doing it now. And all of a sudden you're on the floor rolling around and making a fun game out of it. And so that's where I encourage people, parents, to try to bring in those elements of games, competition, and fun.
That's great advice. What about, let's say parents have some concerns about the overall school environment, and I don't know what that is, sorry. Okay. Let's say parents have some concerns about the overall school environment, and they feel maybe it's not very boy-friendly. Are there ways that parents can work productively with the school to help make the environment more boy-friendly? For instance, things like recess time or certain policies.
Yes, I mean, I think it's great if parents can get involved in the school on multiple levels, so that they can, such as school improvement teams, where some of these very conversations, and PTO meetings, where some of these very specific conversations have an opportunity to happen. Through those organizations, there could be an initiative set up for the creation of like a book study, where parents can get together in the school library and have a book study and sort of share some knowledge and create some sort of proactive initiatives to share the information with the school. And then certainly just as individuals, I would hope that that parents would feel comfortable enough to talk to the teacher, talk to the principal, and say, "Hey, I've come across this really interesting research, some websites, a book. I'd be happy to bring a copy by for you. This book just really describes my son to a T. And it's fascinating, and I'd love to bring a copy to the school if you'd be willing to look at it." And you know, and saying, just quoting something, you know, from a particular resource, like recess, for example. We all take away recess when kids get in trouble, but is that actually working against us instead of for us? And posing some questions like that in a sort of very mutually collaborative way, I think keeps those doors open.
I know one thing I've found helpful is talking to other parents who have boys too, because it helps. You know, it helps me understand, do they have the same concerns, and it helps me verify if what I'm hearing from my boys is their experience and their perception, or is it a more universal problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and it would certainly, just those conversations with other parents, and then, you know, if there was a group that wanted to go a little bit further and formalize those conversations, like through a book study or something. I mean, I think that would be a great conversation to start in any school, and it can start with a group of informed, proactive parents that are bringing in some new information, pairing it with their experiences, and enhancing their own parenting strategies, as well as then maybe inviting the principal down to one of the book studies, and, you know, and sharing some of the high points, you know, and integrating it, not inviting the principal so that you can now say, "Oh, well, the book says these are all the things you're doing." Yeah, of course, right? But saying, "Hey, here's some really interesting things," like posing it more as questions, like, you know, we're reading about, you know, recess, and it seems obvious that you would take that away as a consequence, but, you know, it makes, you know, it poses questions, makes us think what's most effective for boys, and how might that look a little differently for girls, you know. And another, I would say, being a principal, one of the things that principals, the main things that principals have to keep their eye on is test score results.
Right.
And so most states now, you can go on to their state Department of Ed and look up their state assessments, and they'll show a disaggregation for a lot of demographics, including gender. So, yeah, so like, for example, in the state of Colorado, where I spent my professional career, you can go there and you can get a disaggregation of third grade writing scores, or, you know, eighth grade writing scores, and it's broken out by the percentage of boys and girls who are proficient or not proficient. And you will just see there's a huge, huge gap. And so that's going to create a sense of urgency for any principal when they see that there's like a 20-point spread between their boys and girls in writing, and they're trying to bring up their writing scores. I mean, what do they need to be talking about for that? They need to be talking about boys. And so then you're kind of creating a sense of urgency in a principal to say, "Wow, I've got a huge gender gap. Yeah, what are we doing about that?"
Okay.
Because we do believe that boys can perform as well as girls, but we're missing the boat.
Finally, do you have any tips for parents who have boys that just, you know, they're turning off already? "I hate school. Why do I have to do this?" What advice would you have for parents in those circumstances?
Well, I think you have to listen with a discriminating ear. I think it's challenging as a parent to know exactly what's going on. They can absolutely be disliking school, but there can also be situations where it's really more of a response to something else. Kids will often say, "I'm bored," or "I hate school," in a kind of a global sense. So I would encourage kids to be a little bit more specific and start maybe a routine of coming home at the dinner table and talking about, what were 3 successes at school today? And then what's one thing you could change or improve if you could? And through that, you can help your child frame that not everything about school is terrible or boring or awful, that actually there were some high points.
Yeah.
And what were some of the things that you would like to change or that could be better? And so balancing that perspective, and then as a parent, that will help you diagnose a little bit if this school situation really is a disaster, and sometimes people have to deal with those situations. Or if there's some context, it could even be a social problem with the child, and then he's coming home and saying, "I hate everything about school." So listen, dig deeper, and have your child talk about both the positives and negatives to get to the heart of it.
Kelley, thank you so much for your time today. This has been very helpful.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Take care, Kelley.